Thank you, everybody, for being on. We're just giving it a minute or two to let everybody who's waiting get access to the Zoom call. We don't want to leave anybody behind. Okay. As the numbers kind of top off, we'll get started here. First of all, a big thanks to my friend, Representative Kevin Brady, represents the district just north of mine. And thank you everybody here for joining our yet another Coffee with Crenshaw. These have been a massive success and a great way to adapt to our current environment where we can't do it in person, unfortunately. So Congressman Kevin Brady, he represents the 8th district, just north of us. Like I said, Representative Brady, he serves as the top Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, which has broad jurisdiction over our country's tax code. And as chairman of Ways and Means in 2017, Mr. Brady was instrumental in writing and passing into law the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was a truly landmark piece of legislation that cut taxes for middle-class Americans and really did unleash a period of unprecedented economic growth in our country. As the Republican leader of the Ways and Means Committee in this Congress, Representative Brady helped pass into law the USMCA, a new trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. This was the reform to NAFTA. It was a huge win for American workers and our economy. Now Representative Brady is helping make sure COVID relief packages we are passing are focusing on reviving our economy as soon as possible, which is the topic of discussion for today's coffee. I think I speak for myself when I say, Representative Brady, that our priorities in the upcoming relief bill are straightforward. We want to help get people back to work. We want to help businesses reopen safely. We want to protect small business owners and others from frivolous lawsuits and lawyers trying to take advantage of this crisis. We've learned a lot since passing the CARES Act. Primarily, we've learned what not to do in the upcoming legislation, which is to give people an incentive to stay home from work. As you know, the CARES Act established an additional federal unemployment benefit that allowed people who qualified for unemployment to collect an extra $600 a week on top of what they normally would collect through state unemployment. Certainly well-intentioned, especially given the magnitude of this crisis and the uniqueness of it, but it created a real problem because people were being paid more money to stay home than to go to work, than their old job was paying them. And a lot of small business owners, especially here in Texas and many other states, they were struggling to get employees back in the door. They got customers back in, but they couldn't get their workers back in. And therefore our economic growth was not what it could be, and our recovery is not what it could be. People were making a very rational financial decision to stay home, but it's not sustainable. Our goal has to be to keep as many employees attached to their original employer throughout this pandemic. And that's the way to do that, is to ensure people return to their jobs. So under the latest COVID relief package, currently still under negotiation, Republicans are proposing extending the unemployment insurance for a limited period of time, so long as the total amount doesn't exceed what people were already receiving through their paychecks. That's a common sense way to help people, help encourage people to get back to work. Another one of our priorities is protection from frivolous lawsuits, liability protections, which we're worried some are already being filed across the country. Plaintiffs' lawyers are already advertising, ready to bring the heat to these small businesses. Businesses, schools, and churches that are acting in good faith and following guidelines are afraid to open because of the potential risks of these lawsuits. Again, this is hurting our overall recovery. One National Federation of Independent Business survey of Oklahoma found that 72% were concerned about increased liability and reopening. So we're working hard to include those protections in there. Unfortunately, Democrats are not negotiating in good faith, which is, I'm sure, very surprising. And this is the big part of this delay. They are not. Instead, they wanted to pass, bills that had really had nothing to do with the pandemic. Environmental studies, funding for environmental studies, marijuana banking, and big changes to election law. So we've been asking our colleagues to come across the aisle and actually fix these things, fix the unemployment insurance issue, provide protections for small business owners, funding for the schools that are reopening and getting kids back in there, and reviving our economy. So I'm hopeful that we can put those politics aside and get this started. Again, I want to let Representative Brady take the floor. Representative Kevin Brady, if you have any opening remarks, please feel free to do so, and then we'll get to questions.
Great, Dan. First, thanks for having me part of your town hall meeting. Secondly, thanks for your leadership in Congress. Obviously, everyone knows about your role in national security and on budget issues, but on energy issues, really crucial, our Houston region and Texas, on economic issues, especially for our small businesses at home. You've been an amazing leader, so thank you for that. I think your priorities are exactly what the country needs here. Obviously, the CARES Act was the largest economic emergency aid package in American history. A great deal of it has not actually been spent yet and reached to our local communities. So this follow-on package really needs to be targeted. We want people to return to their lives, to healthy lives and to a healthy economy. And I think your priorities there, making sure we can help reconnect workers to their job, making sure that businesses aren't sued when they do the right thing to create a healthy, safe workplace, making sure we increase testing, that we expand help to small businesses. I think the PPP program was crucial, saved nearly 50 million jobs, nearly 5 million of them here in the US. And the help we're giving to local hospitals, nursing home, healthcare providers, state and local governments, all that I think have been pretty crucial here. And so at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the temporarily unemployed aren't permanently unemployed, and that we provide the resources to help businesses, allow folks, customers, and workers to come back. And so, and I think too, we'll talk about this, about what we should do going forward. But I think that the changes in the PPP and the help for our small businesses will continue to be helpful. So thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Kevin. Justin, we'll let you start with the Q&A.
All right, so the first one is for Mr. Crenshaw. It's a broad question on our recovery from COVID. What are the needs we must address across the nation and here in Texas?
So many, but I'll keep it specific to the topic of this particular event. Think of it this way: Republicans are in favor of restoring, renewing, and rebuilding our country. Restoring, renewing, rebuilding. And, this is in opposition to, say, endless and universal shutdowns, attempts to disrupt and dismantle key aspects of our economy via enormous tax increases, which is the proposal on the other side, or even, doing any kind of business more difficult, making independent contracting more difficult. These are, I'm just repeating actual bills that have been passed out of the Pelosi's house recently. We want to make it easier to do business. We want you to be rewarded for your efforts. We want you to be able to afford basic needs like healthcare, your education, and your housing. And so as we go forward, we're going to have one foot in the pandemic recovery phase and one foot in the economic recovery phase. And I think we've successfully, at least in Texas, I think we've successfully figured out how to do both. And that's the good news. We're watching our hospitalization curves go down sharply. I think that's the best measure when we're trying to figure out where we are currently in dealing with the pandemic, because that represents a current snapshot of how people's health is at any given moment. Okay, so because case numbers could be up to a week old, deaths can be up to a week old or even more. So hospitalizations have been trending downward across Texas. They've been trending downward in Houston for a while, so that's the good news. And we've had limited and more targeted shutdowns, and I think that should have been the way I think the entire world dealt with this pandemic all along. But because of the havoc wreaked on the economy and our society, again, economy doesn't just mean dollar signs; it means people's lives. The Senate HEALS Act, right now it's focused, again, it's still under negotiation, but it's focused on a few things in particular. Finding cures, getting the health of our citizens, make sure that there's nobody that goes without the care that they need for COVID. Okay, so make sure the hospitals are funded, testing is funded, and cures are funded, and treatments are funded. Number 2, economic assistance. Number 3, liability protection. Number 4, schools. Remember, all of the science says you got to get kids back into school. That is devastating to kids' education and health when they're not in school, especially for low-income kids. Okay, and you've got to do it safely, and you've got to do it in a smart manner. But we can do this, and we have to have in-school education as our goal. It has to be done safely. You got to take precautions, and schools have to figure that out with the guidelines that the CDC has given them. And those guidelines are very clear. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some funding, but the Senate bill would provide that funding for schools that put kids back in there. So I think that's a good framework from where to start. There's certainly things that we're not going to agree on in that package. Some things that maybe go too far one way or the other, but overall, it's the right framework. I think we've made some progress on the economic front, but unemployment's still too high, and so we have to get that down. We have to get people hired again, and people who are hurting, who have not been hired back. We want to make sure they're able to pay their rent, able to meet their basic needs. So in Houston, we're at about 10% unemployment rates. That's since June, since last time it was measured. It's not good. We're even doing better than New York City, LA, which are nearly 20%. And so, across the country, where people are hurting, and we need these bills to actually address that. And we've got to get our economic foundations, which are strong, back. Recently, Texas was declared as the best business environment in the nation. There's a reason for that. There's sources of success. There's things that make a state more prosperous, a city more prosperous, and a country more prosperous. We can't forget those things. We have to stick by those principles as we recover.
Okay, the next question again is for you, Mr. Crenshaw. What are the differences between the Democrat proposed relief package and the Republican package?
So the HEROES, what the Democrats are often referring to is the HEROES Act, which was passed a while back, a few weeks ago at this point, and $3 trillion in spending. So that's one of the big differences. Democrats are always willing to spend more of your tax dollars. That is a fact. We can never outspend them because we have limiting principles as Republicans, and we do believe in some sense of fiscal responsibility. I know some people would argue that, hey, that the deficits still go up under Republicans, and that's true. We need to get a handle on that. But I promise you they'd always go up more under Democrat governance. And that's a big one. Also, a lot of what they put in that bill had nothing to do with economic recovery or COVID-19. One would be an expansion of the state and local tax deduction, which just all that does is help wealthy individuals in blue states. Okay, we took that away from them under Congressman Brady's leadership when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was basically just taxing really wealthy people in places like New Jersey, New York, and California, saying that you don't get to deduct your state and local taxes as much as you used to. Okay. The other thing, and so Democrats would reverse that. Why? Because they represent places like New Jersey, New York, and California. The most powerful Democrats represent these states. So these are just tax cuts for the wealthiest. It also provides $500 billion, well, I think more than that, to bail out states with really no accountability and not ensuring the funds actually flow to local governments. These are mostly going to states that didn't have a good handle on their finances prior to the pandemic. So I don't know why any Texas congressperson would actually vote for that. It's not fair to Texas taxpayers because Texas has less need for that because we do balance our budget. We have our rainy day funds. We actually, think ahead more than a couple months when we budget, which is a good thing. And again, good governance matters. Also, it had massive changes to election law, pushing states to change their voting systems. Remember, you're hearing it over and over again. The Democrats want mail-in ballots, universal mail-in ballots, to just be sent to everybody. That's very different from you just requesting your ballot. Say if you're in Texas and you're disabled or a senior citizen, you can request that mail-in ballot. That's a common thing to do, but you have to verify who you are and then sign up for that and request it. So there's more steps in there that make it a more of a safe way to vote. The way the Democrats want to do it, whereas if you're registered at all on the rolls, they just send out ballots. That is ripe for fraud and abuse, because there's huge numbers of just mistakes made in our registration rolls. So those ballots could go anywhere. Multiple households might get a bunch of different ballots, and then and anybody could just send them back and have that vote counted. Probably won't know the outcome of elections for weeks after the election. And, even if it's just off by half a percentage point, well, elections are often decided by half a percentage point. So that matters. We don't have room for mistakes there, but this kind of bill would actually make our voting system worse. There is some common ground. Both bills include the additional round of $1,200 a month stimulus payments. But the Democrat bill has no liability protection, which most Americans want. We asked them, we surveyed them, and we talked about it at length. And so those are the big ones. I don't know if Congressman Brady has anything to add to that.
No, I think that's a terrific summary. I think the key difference here is, look, Congress, this is an unprecedented pandemic. It has taken a unprecedented response, and we got that from our healthcare workers, our essential businesses, our local banks. We got it from our chambers of commerce and our small business people, and we had an unprecedented response, bipartisan, from Congress. We came together on 4 major bills, quickly accelerating testing. We're seeing the results in the vaccines. We're seeing the results of those first bills right now in the acceleration of the vaccines, the treatments for those who've acquired COVID, as well as the testing area. But now the focus really needs to be on, restoring, as Dan said, those healthy lives, and restoring and renewing our economy, making sure we can connect people back to work. And in the Democrat House bill, I think my view, did zero to help those who are temporarily unemployed get back to work, which should be our top economic priority. Also, it had a lot of, nonsensical things in there. What is marijuana banking and early release for criminals have to do with getting people back to work? The answer is zero. And that's why I think the Senate bill, while it's a starting point and not perfect, the HEALS Act is far more targeted. It targets funding toward testing, telehealth expansion, which has really been critical, and new flexibility for workers' health accounts, we think is really key right now. A lot of state and local governments got dollars from Congress, almost $750 billion from Congress, and much of those dollars hasn't yet been spent. In Houston, in Harris County, as of the beginning of July, only 10% of those state and local dollars had been spent yet. And so rather than another round of dollars where most of it still hasn't been used, the Senate bill allows state and local governments to use those dollars for replacing lost tax revenue, but only if they share those dollars with their local communities, smaller cities, rural counties. More than half the states in America refused to share those dollars with smaller cities and counties. It has left a lot of communities in a lurch who are spending a lot of money on COVID. So we're insisting that states and counties, major counties like Harris County, use those dollars for what Congress intended them to be. It also, as Dan said, really helps local businesses keep and hire workers. The expansion of the PPP includes a second round of funding for small businesses in certain categories, a new very low interest 1% long-term loan program for small businesses as well, expands it to chambers of commerce and allows you to use it for a broader range of expenses for small businesses. It also includes expansion of something Ways and Means Republicans and I brought to the CARES Act. It's called the Employer Retention Tax Credit. in this program where we can help offset about half the cost of the wages for workers. This will help businesses whose recovery is going to be slow, and some of them just are around the country. Final point, and I think Dan already sort of nailed it, which is we needed to move quickly to help people who are unemployed, a lot of Americans. But $600 a week turned out to be a barrier to reconnecting workers with their workplace. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that if we extended it, 5 out of 6 Americans would be paid more not to work than to go back to work. If that occurs, we will lose, I think, millions of small businesses. We will have much slower recovery. And my biggest worry, and Dan's as well, is that if you choose just to ride out those benefits, our worry is don't be surprised when you think it's time to go back to work that business isn't there and your job isn't there. And so the earlier we reconnect folks to their job, the better for everyone, because at the job, that's where you get your health care. That's where you get your retirement. That's where, things happen in a more positive way. A final point here, I think, is that we can do more, in my view, to help economic growth beyond just the next few months. House Republicans think that's a big part of restoring our economy. I also believe House Republicans have introduced bills that would make America medically independent from China, where we provide tax incentives to bring and produce those medicines, medical supplies, ingredients, and technology here in the U.S., which not only is good obviously for American workers, but it makes us far more resilient and dependable in these pandemics.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
I think we basically answered the next question.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was going to say.
The difference between the CARES and the HEALS. I just want to clarify for everybody, because we throw around these bill names a lot. So remember, the CARES Act was passed. There was CARES 1 and CARES 2. So, the PPP funding that everybody understands, that came from the CARES Act. The HEROES Act is the competing Democrat bill with the Republican HEALS Act. So HEROES versus HEALS. Okay, but all of them are the second round of the CARES Act. Okay, I just want to, but it gets probably a little bit confusing. And what Congressman Brady just did was sort of outline what the HEALS Act is and how that's it really just builds upon the CARES Act, targets the funding a little bit better, and it's a different bill for a different time, even though that time is only a couple of months later. We've better assessed the problems that we're facing, and we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this question, I'll open it up to both of you if you'd like. Finding a vaccine and additional treatments is the most important step for a full recovery. What is being done to accelerate a cure?
It's worth noting that our healthcare system is the only one in the world naturally situated to cure and treat coronavirus. We're the only country in the world that has the true innovation, true incentives for research and development. And are things too expensive here? Yes, but it's also because we spent a lot more money on research and development, and we're the ones coming up with the breakthroughs. So there's 345 companies in the United States working on 600 plus different vaccines and treatments for the coronavirus. No other country comes close to that. China's the closest with 44 institutions working on a cure or a treatment. And those are probably all run by some kind of government entity. The president launched Operation Warp Speed in order to streamline the funding and purchasing of new vaccines. And none of this means that there's going to be shortcuts taken in testing, just to be clear. Our FDA has the highest standards in the world. It just means that the U.S. is pushing a lot of resources into vaccine development and coordination. They're contrary to the popular talking points by MSNBC, there's been a national plan on this from the beginning. It's unfortunate that so many people believe otherwise. It's just simply not true. Between things like Operation Warp Speed to make a vaccine, Operation Air Bridge to get PPE in from all over the world, when we unfortunately discovered that our supply chains were not what they should be. That was a national effort, and it was actually very successful. On the vaccines, there's 3 candidates in phase 3 testing, which is the last stage before it goes into the internal review process at FDA. Now that usually takes a long time. In this case, it will not, because they're obviously going to prioritize that quite a bit. At the current rate, it's possible to have an approved vaccine by the end of October. The president's also negotiating contracts with 2 very special manufacturing hubs, one at Texas A&M. This hub was created for the sole purpose of being able to manufacture a vaccine very quickly, and they're already preparing for the handoff. Once the FDA gives the green light, they can go ahead and start manufacturing. I think this will happen very fast. There's also other promising treatments that I've been told about by local doctors here. Antiviral, so not vaccines, but more like antiviral treatments like inhalants that can also be produced very rapidly and quickly. There's some hope for that as well. It's also worth noting that just in general, our treatment regimes have gotten so much better. And it's unfortunate for our fellow Americans in New York. They didn't understand the treatments as well for a long period of time. And as we've learned more, we've gotten much better at treating it through a series of maybe steroids and antibiotics, not using ventilators as much, and so people are surviving, and they're spending less time in the hospital as well. So there's good news. It's amazing to see our healthcare capacity, or our healthcare system step up to the challenge here.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is on the federal deficit, Mr. Crenshaw. The CBO projects the federal budget deficit is projected to be $3.7 trillion for fiscal year 2020, which is roughly double the expected federal revenue. More spending will exacerbate the deficit. What constraints or hard limits does Congress have to prevent abuse of overspending and the resulting consequences?
Well, this is going to be a long-term problem for my generation and our kids. So in 2019, Congress approved the Bipartisan Budget Act, which extended the debt ceiling through July 2021 and increased spending caps. I voted against that because of concerns with the debt, which back then was high, and now it's about $3 trillion higher, just over 26 trillion. Back then it was around 23 trillion. So by suspending the debt ceiling, there's no hard constraint. And it doesn't mean Congress should act recklessly and pass bills that are bloated and ill-designed for the current situation. But there is not really a constraint in law. I mean, there never has been. That's the argument for a constitutional amendment that would put some kind of constraint in there. There's probably lots of creative ways to do that. But no, right now there's nothing. So over the last 2 weeks, the spending bills that have been rammed through, because there has been minibus bills rammed through the House over the last couple of weeks, they blew out the budget caps that we even agreed on, and that's a problem too. I'll say that the reality is when we're looking at long-term debt, this has to be an honest conversation that the whole country has. Americans have to decide that this matters to them enough. The truth is that it's mandatory spending programs that are overwhelmingly the cause for most of our spending. And if you look at a share of spending and a share of GDP, those are the programs that are rapidly rising. The stuff we fight about every year, the discretionary spending, things like the Department of Defense, the EPA, the Department of Homeland Security, all of the agencies that you know so well, those are all funded on an annual basis. And we're probably spending too much on there, but that's not what the cause is of all the growth. It's the mandatory spending programs. And if we don't have a real conversation about those, we're never going to get a handle on the out of control spending. And we worry greatly that at a certain point, the value of the dollar plummets as people stop buying up our debt. And we don't know when that's going to happen. We're only going to know it happened when it's too late. And that's the scary thing about the out of control debt. But as Americans, we have to decide that we're not going to be bought off by false government promises anymore. We have to decide that we're going to have a real adult conversation about our spending. And until that happens, it's going to be very difficult for politicians in Washington to have that conversation. Their constituents want to have it. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening as much.
Yeah, can I just to add to that? Look, there's a new monetary theory that some in Washington are peddling, which says deficits don't matter. It doesn't matter how big our national debt is. It's all great. That's a foolish theory. Debts do matter. There is real consequences to, as we've seen in Greece and around the world, to those that load up on debt. And while it was absolutely necessary for us to respond to this pandemic, both from a health standpoint and an economic standpoint, it doesn't change exactly what Dan just said, which is we are loading up on debt quickly. So debt matters. Secondly, we are way overdue for that adult conversation. Everyone knows what we need to do, both parties, to come together. We need to continue. We need to grow revenues. We need to constrain our spending growth in a responsible way and come together on a solution. Thankfully, after tax reform, America enjoyed two of the largest revenue years in American history. We were growing our revenue at record pace. Obviously, pandemic has changed that, and we can make some smart policy decisions in this next package that help us grow and recover, not just economically, but in the budget as well. I'm hopeful that in this, what I think will be the last COVID package, will include some mechanism that forces the adult conversation Dan Crenshaw just talked about. Because we need to come together on this. It's too big for just one party to solve. We're going to have to find common ground. And in the Areas and Ways and Means Committee, you know, we've developed proposals on how we save Social Security for the long term, how we save Medicare, which is 10 years from bankruptcy, in its hospital trust fund. And the House has already passed, when we were Republicans, proposal that reforms Medicaid to save it for the long term as well. Both parties, we're going to have a very difficult conversation, but it's long overdue.
Okay. Mr. Brady, the next question is for you. It's on relief for individuals. How long can and for how much can we expect the additional unemployment benefit to last?
So the unemployment benefit expired, as you know, July 25th, the $600 benefit. But as you know, the states provide between 40 and 50% of your wages. That continues. In fact, Texas has already extended ours for a full year. And so that social safety net underlies every state in America right now. The only question is, will the unprecedented federal supplement continue? And if so, what does it look like? So the Democrats proposed the $600 across the board through next spring, which, as I said, would have some real dire economic consequences. The Senate took a different approach. They proposed a smaller monthly add-on, $200 each week, but they transitioned the supplement back to the state benefits. So in other words, in Texas, you would get your state benefit plus some percentage, let's just say 50%. If we do that, that means your unemployment will be based on your wages in your job in your state. And so it knows the difference between, you know, a server in a restaurant in New York and a server in a restaurant in Idaho. So it makes more sense and removes the barrier for workers, because again, right now it wasn't intended to be a real barrier. Turns out it is. And if we continue it, there's problems. So I think there is, in fact, I'm convinced there's a way we can help the unemployed in a serious way, but we can remove those barriers and help get folks back to work.
Excellent. And Mr. Brady, this next question again is for you. It's on the economic stimulus payments. When can we expect the new economic stimulus payments to come through, and how will they be structured?
Yeah, so still under negotiation, but I think the short answer is the president wants to see another round of stimulus checks this year, this fall, as soon as Congress can approve them. He's proposed just recreating the first round of payments, which were designed to look like the round under President Obama and President Bush. It mirrored that design. I think he's looking at the same thing, although some expansion to help all dependents, whether you're a college student or a dependent, an elderly dependent at home. How soon it would get out, because it would be based on the first round, my guess is pretty quickly. You know, they began sending checks out, I think it was in 17 days of Congress approving it, which was unbelievably quick. We know there were some glitches and continue to be some glitches in that program. We're all working with constituents who haven't yet received them, but it looks like that's what the design will be. I think the Treasury Department, which handles this, can move pretty quickly. They're still negotiating how much the amount would be. Under the first round, it would be about $2,500 for a family of 4. That's still under discussion.
Okay. Mr. Crenshaw, the next question is for you. How is Congress helping gig economy workers and independent contractors right now?
In a variety, well, the Senate bill helps them in a variety of ways. First, I want to talk briefly about what that means, gig economy workers and independent contractors. A lot of people like the freedom of work and flexibility that is associated with working in the gig economy and working as independent contractors. You know, your Uber drivers, your Lyft drivers, that maybe they get off their normal job and they drive for a few hours, or they deliver food, or whatever it is. I mean, that's the beauty of our of the internet and in our smartphones and our apps that allow us to do these things. Some writers, they don't want to write for a particular publication. They want to sell their work to a variety of publications. You have to understand that in places like California, they pass laws to inhibit that. The Democrats in our House of Representatives, passed laws called the PRO Act to inhibit that. Basically end independent contracting, force companies to hire them full on as full-time employees, which really just means when you add those extra costs that they're just not going to hire them. And so there'll just be less jobs available. That's always the outcome of something like that. You have to understand, what both parties actually want to promote when it comes to the gig economy. So the CARES Act provided assistance by extending the traditional and supplemental unemployment benefits to groups that normally wouldn't be eligible, like independent contractors and gig workers. That extra $600 was available for them too. It lapsed, of course, just like it did for everybody else on August 1st. But traditional benefits will still be available to independent contractors and gig workers, through your state-run programs like the Texas Workforce Commission. That'll still happen through the end of the year. The Senate HEALS Act would help gig economy workers through by way of regulatory relief. So that would allow companies like platform companies like Uber and Lyft to provide certain COVID-related benefits to their drivers, where before maybe they couldn't. And this provision also allows firms to provide the non-cash benefits that they previously could not, such as testing, PPE, healthcare, et cetera. Provide that to their contractors without actually jeopardizing the employment status, the 1099 employment status of those workers.
Thank you. And Mr. Crenshaw, this next question is again for you. How likely is it that the eviction moratorium continues, and how is this fair to landlords who are also hurting?
Yeah, that always seems to be the thing that people sloganeer is, just don't let people get evicted, right? Okay, well, then the landlord can't pay their mortgage. Okay, we'll cancel mortgages is what they say. Well, fine, then the banking system is no longer receiving those payments, and you end up with another financial crisis like we did in 2008. So the solution is to target the actual problem, which is rent isn't getting paid. Housing is a local issue. You know, in Houston, I think they just approved additional rent relief payments. That's the right I think solution. You know, make sure that people can pay their rent, which is why we're focused on unemployment benefits, right? If you're unemployed, it's obviously harder to pay your rent. And so we want to make sure that one, you get reattached to your job as quickly as possible so that you can go back to paying your rent. And if not, that your benefits can pay for that, which is again why we're looking at reforming that just right, making it closer to what your old job was paying. And so, you know, under the CARES Act, there was an eviction moratorium enacted for 120 days on public housing, housing choice vouchers, and FHA insured multifamily properties. That moratorium ended on July 25th. But again, I think enacting the rent relief payments at the local level and making sure there's federal funding for that, which there is the right way to go about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Brady, this next question is for you. If I qualified for the EIP, but didn't receive it, the economic impact payment, but didn't receive it, what can I do?
Yeah, so my guess is it probably had something to do with the timing of your tax filing this year. I know that was the situation with my son who works, and I think that's the case with many. And ultimately, I think many of our folks in that situation were told, look, you'll receive your paycheck when you file your 2020 taxes. Not very satisfying, but I think Treasury is pretty upfront about, you know, we didn't have your new tax filing in turn. We used the 2018 one. My guess is this new round of stimulus checks will do exactly the same thing. So my guess is you'll probably get a double stimulus in your 2020 tax return. I know Ways and Means Committee, we have jurisdiction of the IRS, and much of Treasury, we have been in constant contact with the Commissioner of the IRS and his team on fixing some of these problems. Still, I think the fact that they moved out, I think 120 to 140 million stimulus checks in almost record time was an achievement. But for those 10 million or so, you know, who the timing didn't work for them, it's been frustrating. And so we're continuing to work with the IRS. My assumption is it'll look like the first one, but they are working to see if they can't sort of tackle that one problem a little better.
Okay, Mr. Crenshaw, this next question is for you. I've heard anecdotes from people who are affected by stimulus check fraud. Is there a measure in place to protect people from people looking to steal their stimulus checks?
As far as measures, you know, it's you can't prevent that, but we can educate the public on what to look for. There has been a trend of fraud with the economic impact payment checks, and they recommend steps to protect taxpayers. So first of all, only use irs.gov/coronavirus, that website, to submit information to the IRS, and never do so in response to a call, text, or email. That's not how the IRS will contact you. They won't contact you by phone, email, or text message, or social media. Any kind of information. They won't ask for your social security number that way, your bank account, or anything. Anyone who does is probably a scammer fishing for your information. You never have to pay anything to get your stimulus money, so be wary of anybody who claims you do have to pay. The IRS won't tell you to deposit your stimulus check and send the money back because they paid you more than they owed you. That's a fake check scam. And you should report scams to the Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov/complaint. And you can also go to ftc.gov for the latest scams so that you're aware of them.
Okay, Mr. Brady, this next question is for you. There's talks that Democrats and Joe Biden want to reverse the Trump tax cuts and increase the corporate tax rate. How would this impact the recovery?
Yeah, I think it'd be awfully dangerous and reckless. It would be in any economic time, but even more so as this country is fighting to recover from the economic damage from this pandemic. Just bring it down to real people. You repeal the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Okay, that's $2,000 less for a typical family of four in our region. Coming out of pandemic, do you really need Washington to take more of what you earn? For that small business, that new 20% deduction to lower your taxes along Main Street is gone. That doubled the child tax credit, which is really important for families raising kids, is gone. That we designed this tax code to help workers, help working families. And so under Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that single mom with a daughter, today she doesn't pay a dime of federal income taxes for the first $63,000 of what she earns. That goes away when they repeal the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Not only that, but all of our redesign of our code, so our Texas companies could compete and win anywhere in the world, including here at home, goes away. And we return to the bad old days of Joe Biden when he was in the White House. There's no question they inherited a tough recession, but that was minor compared to what we have inherited with this pandemic. And theirs was the slowest economic recovery in our lifetimes. In 8 years after the recession, most Americans still felt they were in a recession. All that has changed because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. What I don't want to see either is going back to that 10 years, lost 10 years, most of it under President Obama and Joe Biden, where paychecks were stagnant, jobs for our kids coming out of school were so-so, and every week it seemed like we went online or read about another American company moving their headquarters, their manufacturing, their research overseas. We had some 19 in Texas companies do that. That all ended with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It just ended. Now companies are moving their investment, their manufacturing, their research back in the US. So the short answer is it would be very dangerous to follow his prescription and go back to the bad old days. Frankly, we're proposing, especially to become medically independent from China, we're proposing lower tax rates on companies that will bring their jobs, their medicines, their medical supplies, their technology, those rare ingredients to make medicines back to the US, because those companies are making those decisions right now. In other countries are competing pretty aggressively for them. I want to see that anchored here in the US. And so short answer is really, really dumb move to take more from families and local businesses' pockets right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Brady, this next question is also for you. Can you tell us about incentives for businesses to help defray the cost of restructuring their workplace and purchase PPE for their employees?
Yeah, this is something Dan and I both worked on, which was it became clear that to create healthy and safe workplaces, both for their employees and for their customers, which is a big confidence builder, our businesses were going to need a little help. And so we introduced, and the Senate has included, a healthy workplace tax credit, where basically we defray up to half of the costs of testing your employees, the PPE gear they need, cleaning the facilities and businesses, as well as reconfiguring your workplaces so that they are safe and healthy. The healthy workplace tax credit helps shoulder the costs up to $1,000 per worker. To do that, we are getting tremendous support from Main Street businesses, manufacturers, restaurant groups, everyone, especially small businesses who frankly, they don't have money coming in. Every dollar they spend is important. So we think we can help cover and shoulder some of those costs. Right now, we worked hard to build bipartisan support for that healthy workplace tax credit, certainly within the Ways and Means Committee as well. So I'm pretty hopeful about that.
Okay, Mr. Crenshaw, this question is for you. I'm worried about potential liability, even if I follow safety guidelines and provide my employees PPE. What is the status of liability discussions?
Yeah, like I said, the Senate HEALS Act creates a temporary federal cause of action for personal injury and medical liability claims arising from potential exposure to the coronavirus. So it's much more limited. We have to protect against frivolous lawsuits. So this cause of action, which would govern all cases, including those pending on the date of enactment, would be available to plaintiffs for claims arising between December 2019 and October 24, or October 2024, or the end of the coronavirus emergency declaration, whichever comes later. And it would govern any claim against any defendant, including people, schools, colleges, government agencies, and businesses. Requires that the plaintiff's claim it requires that the plaintiffs make claim by clear and convincing evidence. Plaintiffs must establish that the defendant acted with gross negligence or willful misconduct that caused the plaintiff's coronavirus, and limits damages to economic losses, excluding punitive damages except in the cases of intentional misconduct. Exempts employers from liability under federal labor and employment laws for actions taken to comply with public health guidelines. Again, so where is this now? I mean, it's still in negotiation. The Democrats don't like this. Remember, they like their lawyers, and they want to give them plenty of business. They actually made it. They'd proposed even easier ways for trial lawyers to take it to businesses in past legislation. So, we're worried about this, and I think most Americans, well, I know most Americans agree with us because we survey them and we ask them. We've got to protect the things that make our economy work, and those things are small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and large businesses. We don't want to do things that make it harder for these people to survive. Just as Congressman Brady was just talking about, they're really absurd proposals to raise taxes across the board. Raising our corporate tax rate, which would be on top of the state income taxes, state corporate taxes that many states have as well. So that's why you're looking at potentially 40% in some cases. Why would anybody do business here? How are we possibly going to get our manufacturing back in the United States when we put barriers in place to do that? And we can put all the tax credits we want to manufacture here, but they're immediately canceled out by what the Democrats want to do with the corporate tax rate. Very, very bad policy. It doesn't make any sense. If you claim you want something, then don't punish people for doing it. That's usually a good idea when you operate in the real world and incentives actually matter. But this is what they're talking about. And we would have tax rates that we had tax rates that were way above the average in Western countries. Even European countries don't do that kind of silly stuff. They would also drastically raise taxes on capital gains and other investments. So what does that do? In reality, what it means is it locks up all investments. Nobody wants to sell anything anymore. So capital can't make it to where it needs to. There would be, less business, less new investments, less new research, less new, old buildings bought out to make them into a manufacturing plant. When you tax that stuff overwhelmingly, it locks up capital, it locks up investment, and we get less economic growth. And it's really, really damaging policy that they want to implement. And it's really scary. And people need to know what they're talking about.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. We can either try to get the last question in, or we can open it up to both of you guys for some closing remarks.
Let's do the last question. It's a good one. I'll just read it.
Okay.
Is it too late to redirect the emphasis of any stimulus to small, medium businesses and giving them significant incentives to hire back their employees? No, not necessarily. It's never too late. So the focus of the PPP program was small businesses, and the results show that most loans went to those entities overwhelmingly. The next phase needs to be even more targeted. I think places like restaurants, bars, hotels that were particularly hard hit. The Republican bill, the HEALS Act, it sets aside $190 billion to create another round of PPP loans programs to provide financial assistance to struggling small businesses and independent contractors and the self-employed. The second draw loan aims to assist smaller firms disrupted the most by the pandemic. To be eligible, you have to have 300 or fewer workers and show a loss of 50% or more in revenue in one of the first 2 quarters of 2020 compared to 2019. To qualify for forgiveness, they must spend 60% of the loan on payroll, leaving 40% for eligible non-payroll costs. The bill also reserves $25 billion for businesses with fewer than 10 employees and sets aside $10 billion for community lenders to access that second draw loan.
Okay, and we have one more question here. It looks like that we'll be able to fit in. There have been many reports that the PPP program has not worked as designed. Why do you think this is the case, and is there a plan to amend it?
Yeah, well, so the plan is basically what I just said. It makes it more targeted. Of course, there was issues with the PPP program initially. It was, it was done very quickly, and it was designed to be as flexible as possible. And so, you did see some people take the loan who didn't need it. And that was frustrating. It was frustrating to me as a lawmaker and frustrating to regular Americans. It's not even that they really broke the law. It was designed that way so that we could get the money out as fast as possible. And it's difficult in hindsight to see how we would have done it faster and more targeted. So the new ways of doing it are more targeted, require you to show, that your revenue has gone down, and hopefully it goes to, again, there's some of those industries that I mentioned before that really, really need it and that have been hurt really hard by the continued, lockdowns, or at least in Texas, targeted lockdowns, such as your local bar has not been able to open. That's really not fair to them. They should have a different, they should get a different situation with PPP funding than some other business.
Yeah, and just to add to Dan's point, no program in American history has saved more jobs in such a short time as the PPP. 50 million jobs, the dollars went out, started within a week of Congress passing it. It more than did its job. And the public narrative that it somehow went principally to wealthy businesses, it just isn't true. And here in Texas is a great example. I think out of 300 and some thousand loans we did, I think 1% went to were loans bigger than $1 million, and those went to legitimate businesses. It did its job plus more. But as Dan said, when you move that quickly, there's always room for improvement. That's exactly what the second round does. And when you couple the second round of PPP, the low interest loan program that goes with it, the employee retention credit where we help share the cost of your workers. We have new hiring incentives. So the bulk of this next round should be focused on helping businesses keep workers, hire new ones, and ride this pandemic out so we can be ready to recover.
I think that's it for time, Dan.
Great. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for being on. I want to special thanks to Congressman Brady for bringing his expertise. And Congressman Brady, thank you so much for everything you've done on Ways and Means. It gave us the economic foundations that we have today, and we will get those back, and we will get through this. And Kevin Brady's been working tirelessly to get the right policy implemented so that we can actually get through this. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and thank you, Congressman Brady. Do you have any closing remarks?
No, take care. Dan, thanks for having me. Thanks for the incredible job you're doing. Take care, everyone.
Everybody.